Welcome to part two of Is Your Practice Healthy or Not? Specifically, we're going to be talking about the 5 signs of an unhealthy practice. If you are a therapy practice of any size, shape, or form, more often than not, right? We talk to practice owners here at Therapy Flow that are struggling with something. And some of you are struggling with a whole lot of things. You're kind of, about ready to keel over and die of a heart attack from a business perspective. And then we do interact with some practice owners that have figured a lot out and they live a very healthy business lifestyle is maybe the best way to put it. And if you missed our 5 signs of a healthy practice, look for that in the relevant links because we dove into that as well. So Attilio, tell us a little bit about the number one thing that if we see this in a practice, we're like, meh, probably not doing great.
Yeah, I think we have to start with a low to no marketing budget. Okay, I get it, guys. Nobody wants to have to pay to keep the business running. Nobody wants to pay for gas to put it in their car. But if you don't pay
Yeah.
for gas to put it in your car, guess how far your car is going to go? Not very far. You might get lucky and hit the downhill and neutral and get a little bit of extra mileage out if you're me when you're 16. But for the most part, if you're not adding gas to your car, you're going to sputter out and die. And we see it all the time in therapy practices, guys. So don't expect to get great results with low to no effort here. Practices that do spend a lot of money with poor performance have other issues to resolve in this segment. But if you have not allocated something for the survival and growth of your practice, you're essentially admitting to slowly dying, basically.
Yeah. Typically, somewhere between like 5 and 15% is a maintenance budget of your total revenue collected. So let's say you collect $20,000 of revenue in a month, somewhere between like 5 and 15,000, not 500 to 1500 should be spent on marketing that month then as a result of the collections. If you look at annual revenue collections, let's say you do $1 million in annual revenue, then probably somewhere between like 50,000 to 150,000 just on maintenance budgeting, depending on how things are going. And that's pretty standard in this industry actually, and across many other industries. And that's just a barometer to say, whoa, are you anywhere close that type of perspective? The next one is poor client or poor clinical retention. A lot of practices don't know how well they're actually retaining clients. Often, because if the practice owner is still seeing clients, they usually have really good clinical retention and they aren't really paying attention to if their other therapists are retaining clients at the same rate or at the same level. On the flip side, if you've gotten really large and you have 30 to 60 therapists on your team, maybe you're not tracking them as granularly. So there's maybe 5 to 6 therapists on your team that are really underperforming compared to the others. You just aren't keeping clients as long as you should. They are bopping out of session 1 or after session 3. They aren't returning after session 12. Tell us a little bit about what happens to marketing return on investment, Attilio, and just general profitability when a practice retains clients in a healthy way.
Yeah. First of all, I want to let you guys know we see it. It's hard to talk to your clinicians about this, right? There's a lot of ethics and other things wrapped into this conversation. But when you're looking at retention from a business perspective, this is the single biggest way where you guys get profits. So you
Yeah.
have to generate a referral, you have to generate a client for the first time. And usually that's the most expensive part of running and growing a business. Referrals that you get from advocates, so like your clients that are advocates or referral partners, that's like the frosting or the cherry on the cake. Okay. That's the extra profit that you get from being great and working with a higher volume. So if you have poor clinical retention on the new cold signups, what's happening is you're actually taking someone, it costs the most to work with them, and then you're immediately dropping them off. And so your costs just start to mount without ever getting a return on that initial investment for that client. And so,
Yeah.
however you go about doing this, whether it's reactivations or having your intake team be a little bit more responsible for some of the reaction points, or having an SOP for your clinicians in their first session that they just make sure that they go through their checklist, or every session they have a mini SOP. Guys, it's not anything to be ashamed of. Surgeons have SOPs, okay, to make sure that they don't leave the leave the tool in the person's stomach when they stitch them up, right? So surgeons have SOPs. You guys can have SOPs too. And this is all just good, happy, healthy, clean housekeeping.
One quick note on this. Stephanie, one of our main therapy flow practice consultants who runs a lot of coaching calls, multi-location, 50 plus clinicians, multi seven-figure practice owner. She's doing a deep dive breakdown and providing us some great resources. And so look for the relevant link there. We did a live masterclass, provided a ton of resources on how to build clinical retention systems, have hard management conversations, and best practices. So it's just an up close look of a practice that does this in an incredibly healthy way. You can go check that out and grab the sort of like the replay and the asset list for all of those pieces if this is an issue your practice is currently really struggling with. That being said, this leads to another really unhealthy sign is if you have an incredibly slow intake response rate, meaning you get leads, you get phone calls, and your admin team takes days or sometimes weeks, so maybe even hours for certain practices. That is a sign that things are not moving and grooving. Your intake rate will probably suffer, and overall, you're probably missing out on a lot of new client volume, and your admin team is just not operating as sharp of a level. They might not know it's a priority, that you might not have given it to them as a priority, but if you have a really slow response, this is the equivalent of getting like 5 hours of sleep at night. Initially, if you go a couple nights, maybe even a couple of weeks of this type of rhythm, right? You're young, you're in college, there's coffee, there's Red Bulls for it. You can sometimes get a while as a practice owner having a poor intake response time, but over time, years of this, months of this in a practice, it will become your number one bottleneck. You will not know why you're not growing, and it will all sit in your little intake department, and you will have no idea how it got this way. And we see it every day that this is like a hidden bottleneck, and it often rests in just a series of decisions around intake that have not been resolved, especially how responsive your team is.
Yeah, you guys will not, you guys can't fathom how many times we hear when someone first comes in, we don't even take phone calls, or like we don't reply back to voicemails unless they respond to our email, or we only email, or we don't check, like after one email, that's it. This intake process here, guys, is so critical. I think it's important to remember, if you're looking for like another service provider, like a plumber or a roofer, or just anyone doing something that you need to engage with to get into services for, you want to make a phone call, you want to make sure that you've got the right person, and then you want to get booked, right? And so when you're not matching your client's speed, whether that's slower or faster, that can be a massive detriment to the practice.
Yeah. We've got two last big ones, and I think they're both just doozies. Attilio, tell us about number 4. What's happening here?
Yeah, so number 4, guys, is having lots of part-time clinicians. And so I think this is really an interesting one because it sneaks up on you. At first, you're like, I'm just working with the people that want to work with me. But then by the time you realize it, you have 4, 5, 6 clinicians that are all part-time, and you've busted your butt to fill them up, and they're creating half of the revenue that they should be creating. And you've got the same costs, and you've got the same management teams and the same other components, like your building or taxes or whatever else you've got kind of cooking in your practice for costs. But this clinician isn't actually producing the amount that you need them to produce on. So this is kind of a silent killer here, because 9 times out of 10, the practice that has mostly part-time clinicians is struggling. We just see it consistently. And so what you're looking for is getting your full-time clinicians in a capacity that can replace your clinical caseload, so that you can lower the risk for the practice, so that you can take a step back and work on your business. And then you can expand out, and don't compromise. Don't compromise. Usually part-time clinicians also have the downside of getting into a position where they're doing maybe 1 or 2 different things as well. And so they don't have your full attention either. So just another thing to know.
I had lots of cups in front of me. It doesn't matter whether the cups are half full or totally full or empty. As a manager and as a business unit, it costs me the same amount to hold all of those cups in my hand. Whether it's you as the leader or the manager or a manager on your team, especially when it comes to people, it doesn't matter whether their revenue set is half full, it costs the same to hold them, right? Maybe it gets a little heavier if we fill them all up with the water, but the most of the fixed cost or the fixed weight emotionally and tangibly is just carrying the asset in and of itself. And so that's where a lot of practice owners, they're trying to figure out, again, where's the bottleneck? What's going on here? And it rests in this umbrella. Like your hands are full with half filled cups of water. And the only way to resolve this is to either get them totally full or replace them with better situations.
I'll actually add one actually little note too. If you have lots of part-time clinicians, it's also tough to actually crack the code on marketing, especially if they're a diverse plethora of clinicians. So if you have a lot of diversity, you have to create marketing that works for each of them, which is crazy. That's a huge cost, a lot of risks, a lot of time and energy goes into something that is barely profitable or barely gives you the return on investment that you're looking for there. And so keeping a tight focus, working in terms of like pods essentially for your practice, I think is the ideal way. So in pods of full-time clinicians that you can launch marketing for, generate a flow of leads to these clinicians, and then once you're ready, you can open up the next pod for yourself.
And the last sign of an unhealthy practice, by far the most important, therapy practices are driven by people. It's a people business, up and down, any way that you look. Bad team members is the number one sign of an unhealthy practice. Bottom line is don't let your employees stay bad, whether it's your admin or your clinicians. And if they don't change, don't let them stay employees. So this is two levers. Number one is if you don't have the management, leadership, and investment infrastructure in place to train your employees and manage them well and hold them accountable with clarity in their position, they are not going to do well and they will look like a very bad team member. This happens all the time in the admin role, especially. No infrastructure, no scripts, no processes, no expectations, no accountabilities, no clarity. So the admin performs poorly and then they get fired because they're poor performance, but it's actually poor training, poor management. But on the flip side, if you have all of that investment in place and you are doing a great job and they're a bad fit, they have a bad attitude, they have bad ownership, they have bad culture, they have bad interactions with their other team members, they don't change when you train and invest and manage, that is a bad team member. It's holding on to B minus, C minus, and below, right, players longer than you should is a really big sign of an unhealthy practice and an unhealthy leader. You have to be able to let go the bad, move through it, and be able to confidently hire and replace. And Attilio, maybe talk about that one, like the scarcity mindset when it comes to maybe employing a new person in that person's stead.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes has to be, if you're not willing to give up good for great, you'll just never get great, right? The enemy of great is good. It's not bad. And so where you end up is this uncomfortable situation where you're like, they're good enough. I've given them enough tools. And so one of the interesting sides to this is if you're looking for higher tier or more invested team members or different team members, or if you're like, they're good, but they're not great. Netflix has an awesome test. It's called the keeper test. If all of your team hands in their resignations and you wouldn't fight to keep that team member, then maybe that's a sign that you need to replace them. And so who on your team would you not fight to keep? When it comes down to it, recruiting is going to be one of your big levers when it comes to replacing. So how many options do you have? How many people have you talked to? And then what operations and procedures do you have in place to onboard them effectively and set great standards and great expectations for them from the start, so that way they perform at the highest level. I'll also add, guys, it's impossible or very unlikely to find someone that's just a clone of you, right? Find someone that's just a clone of you or that's going to perform more or better than you, which means you as the leader need to set the standard. Oftentimes you need to set the pace. And oftentimes if you're expecting someone to perform at your level or higher, you probably have to give them some type of incentive that's meaningful, right?
Certainly.
So keep that in mind as you're kind of coming through this.
We're all wrapped up. None of these things, if they're going on in your practice, if these are unhealthy things for you all, are permanent. You can change them. You should change them. If you don't know how to change them, that's why we're here. Get help, reach out to us, look at our resources, book a call. We'd be happy to make your practice work better and become healthy so you love the business and you love the practice. We'll see you guys next time. Cheers.